So I'm on the red carpet, and then this guy goes, Blake, your tweets are amazing.
Wait, what?
Right? And I was like, wait, what? Excuse me?
Yeah,
and he was like, your tweets are amazing. And I was like, are we saying that? Like, is this, like, have you been on Google in the past year? Like, this is not okay.
Don't talk like that, no.
And the woman's like, next to him goes, well,
Hollywood thrives on glamour, but behind the sparkle hides a monster of silence, manipulation, and betrayal. And today, Starscope pulls back the curtain on a scandal so twisted, so dangerous, and so deeply buried that it threatens to destroy everything. You thought you knew about Blake Lively, Colleen Hoover, and Justin Baldoni? This is not just another Hollywood story. This is a battle of power versus truth, a war of silence versus survival, and the fallout will leave you questioning every smile, every headline, every promise from the industry that worships lies. When you look at Hollywood from the outside, it appears like a golden palace filled with glittering lights, shining faces, red carpets, and promises of dreams coming true. But the deeper you go, the more you begin to realize that beneath this glittering mask there is a rotting truth, a truth so foul that it smells of betrayal, corruption, and silence, because what they sell you is a fantasy, a carefully crafted illusion designed to make you believe in perfection and inspiration in idols who seem untouchable, but behind the curtain there is a system of power that devours the vulnerable and protects the guilty. And this story, with Blake Lively, Colleen Hoover, and Justin Baldoni, is not just a random scandal. It is a revelation of how deep the poison goes, how far the machine will go, to silence voices and protect those who profit from pain. And every detail you hear will drag you deeper into the abyss, because when Colleen Hoover built her empire with It Ends With Us, she claimed it was a voice for the voiceless, a chance to shed light on stories of survival. But what if that empire was not built on empowerment but exploitation? What if the publishing machine and Hollywood, machine that followed, were not celebrating truth but weaponizing trauma for profit? Because that is the storm we are walking into. And when Blake Lively was brought in, the marketing painted her as a savior, a shining face who could bring the story to life. But what they did not tell you was that behind closed doors, a war was being fought. A war of silence, threats, manipulation, and image control. And Justin Baldoni, who appeared to be a rising force in Hollywood, suddenly found himself trapped. His voice strangled. His choices crushed, because the moment you try to challenge the empire tries to erase you. And this is where the cracks begin to show. Because you cannot hide betrayal forever. You cannot polish poison and call it wine. You cannot take the voices of survivors, twist them into entertainment, and expect the world never to notice. And as the camera flashes burned across red carpets, as interviews played out with fake smiles and empty praise, the truth kept bleeding. Through the cracks, the whispers grew louder, the shadows darker, the weight heavier. Because when a machine is built on lies, eventually those lies will collapse under their own weight. And that collapse is what we are witnessing right now. And Hollywood is terrified. Because this is not just a scandal about 3 names. This is about an entire system that survives only by silencing truth and glorifying illusion. And when you finally see it clearly, you realize that every headline, every glittering smile, every carefully worded statement was part of the act, and the act is now failing, and the empire is trembling, because truth is leaking out like fire, unstoppable, uncontainable, relentless. And if you think this is shocking already, you have not even begun to see how deep this betrayal goes, because the storm is only just beginning. The deeper you descend into this scandal, the more you realize that it is not just about the faces we see on posters or the names we chant on social media. It is about the brutal system that takes human pain and packages it like a product, feeding it to an audience while keeping the truth locked away in chains. And when Colleen Hoover rose to power with her novels, they were praised as raw, honest, emotional. But what they really were was a machine of trauma, endlessly spinning stories of broken lives for consumption. And Hollywood saw profit in that pain. Hollywood saw dollar signs in scars and tears. So they swept in with cameras, lights, contracts, and promises of change, and Blake Lively became their golden face, their shield to make sure the illusion of empowerment could never be questioned. But the truth cannot be polished forever. Because behind that mask, survivors began to whisper. They began to see that their stories were not being honored, but being stripped, rewritten, glamorized until the pain that once had meaning was turned into entertainment for the masses. And Justin Baldoni, the one who dared to stand near this storm, found himself cornered, forced into silence, crushed by the machinery of image control. Because Hollywood does not forgive those who disrupt the game. Hollywood thrives on silence. It thrives on complicity. It thrives on smiles that hide screams and contracts that bury truths. And when whispers began to leak, when questions started to rise about how deep the exploitation ran, the empire moved faster, desperate to protect itself, desperate to silence any noise that threatened its fragile illusion. But the more they silenced, the louder the truth became, because truth is not something that can be strangled forever. It seeps through, it spreads like wildfire, consuming everything, and as fans cheered, as premieres glittered, as headlines screamed empowerment. Empowerment. Empowerment, the shadows screamed betrayal. Betrayal, betrayal. And the world began to notice that something was very wrong. Because when survivors start to say that their pain has been stolen, when voices cry out that they are not being heard but used, twisted, reshaped, and sold, then, you are not watching empowerment, you are watching theft wrapped in a golden bow. And the longer Hollywood pretends, the more dangerous the collapse becomes, because illusions are powerful. But illusions are fragile, and the bigger they grow, the harder they fall, and right now the cracks are widening, the lies unraveling, the mask slipping. Because once betrayal has been revealed, it cannot be unseen. And once silence is broken, it cannot be repaired. And Blake Lively, who once was portrayed as the light, is now seen as part of the shadow. Colleen Hoover, who claimed to tell the truth, is now accused of selling lies. And Justin Baldoni, whose silence screams louder than any words, has become a symbol of what happens when you challenge the empire that thrives on pain. As the mask of Hollywood continues to fracture, the story only grows darker and more suffocating. Because what we are witnessing is not the downfall of a single film or a single celebrity, but the exposure of an entire culture built on lies, manipulation, and the endless recycling of trauma for profit. And in the shadows of this storm, Blake Lively becomes more than just an actress. She becomes a symbol of how Hollywood selects a golden face to shield its rot. Someone to absorb the questions, someone to distract the crowd while behind the curtain contracts are signed, deals are struck, and truths are buried. And Colleen Hoover, who once stood as a writer for survivors, now finds her words turned into weapons, not to liberate but to restrain, not to honor but to sell, and every page, every chapter, every line now feels like a calculated move by a system that feeds on darkness while claiming to offer light. And Justin Baldoni stands in the middle, suffocating under the weight of silence, because when you dare to stand in the way of a machine this large, it does not simply push you aside. It erases you. It rewrites your role. It steals your voice until you are no longer seen as a threat, but as a ghost in the crowd. And that is what makes this scandal so terrifying. It is not just about who said what or who did what. It is about how a billion-dollar empire uses faces and names to create a fantasy, while the reality is drowned beneath oceans of silence. And the more you search, the more disturbing it becomes, because every interview, every carefully crafted statement, every glittering red carpet appearance hides a second story. A story of survivors who never agreed to be entertainment. A story of artists who never agreed to have their truths twisted. A story of creators like Baldoni, who tried to amplify voices only to find that his own was ripped away from him. And this is how Hollywood keeps its throne. Not with talent, not with inspiration, not with art, but with silence, threats, and shadows. It feeds on fear, it thrives on illusions, it weaponizes glamour against truth. And as we peel back these layers, it becomes clear that the story of it ends with us is no longer a story of empowerment at all. It is a story of betrayal, masquerading as inspiration. A story of survival twisted into consumption. And that is why the whispers are now screams, because people are starting to realize that this machine does not care about healing. It cares about profit. It does not care about truth. It cares about control. It does not care about survivors. It cares about keeping the illusion alive. And once the audience sees the strings, once they realize the puppet show was never about art, but always about money, the empire cannot survive, because betrayal once revealed spreads like wildfire, and no amount of polished interviews, no amount of staged tears, no amount of glittering premieres can silence the roar of a world that has finally seen behind the curtain. And now, as the curtain of deceit is being ripped apart, we enter the most dangerous territory of all, because the empire is no longer trying to hide its cracks. It is fighting to survive, clawing and scratching to hold on to the illusion it has built for decades. And this is where the story of Blake Lively, Colleen Hoover, and Justin Baldoni becomes more than a scandal. It becomes a battlefield where truth collides with power and where silence collides with resistance. Because when Blake Lively stepped into this project, she was not stepping into a film. She was stepping into a war. And the image they painted of her was that of a savior. A shining face who could breathe life into a painful story. But the reality is that she was not a savior. She was a pawn apiece on the chessboard of Hollywood, a shield they could use to keep eyes blinded. While behind her, they played their real game. And Colleen Hoover, the architect of the story, stood not as a hero, but as a profiteer because her words, which claimed to honor the broken, were twisted into chains to bind them. Her success was not built on freedom, but on the repackaging of suffering into a product that could be sold to millions. And when Justin Baldoni entered, he believed he was creating change. He believed he was amplifying voices, but instead he was caught in the gears of the machine, forced into silence, stripped of power and turned into another ghost, haunting the halls of Hollywood. And this is how the empire operates. It takes pain and polishes it. It takes truth and rewrites it. It takes survivors and silences them until their voices echo only as background noise in a carefully staged performance. And yet, no matter how many masks they build, no matter how many lies they tell, the truth always claws its way out because betrayal leaves stains that cannot be hidden. And what we are seeing now is not a scandal that will fade with time. It is a collapse of trust, a collapse of illusion, a collapse of the machine itself. Because fans are no longer blind. They are no longer willing to accept glittering lies wrapped in red carpet smiles. They are no longer satisfied with staged interviews filled with hollow words. They are no longer fooled by the golden faces Hollywood throws into the spotlight to cover its rot. And the empire knows this, which is why the silence grows heavier, which is why the pressure on voices like Baldoni grows stronger, which is why every move Blake Lively makes is scrutinized and every word Colleen Hoover speaks is questioned, because once the curtain is pulled back, nothing looks the same. And the people are realizing that this was never a story of hope, but a story of theft. This was never about survivors. It was about profit. This was never about art. It was about control. And when that realization spreads, when the audience begins to demand accountability, when the survivors begin to speak louder than the machine can silence them, the empire will collapse, and that collapse is coming like a storm, unstoppable, relentless, inevitable. And Hollywood is terrified, because this time their lies will not save them. Their masks will not protect them. Their glitter will not blind us anymore, because the truth is louder, the betrayal is clearer, and the voices they tried to bury are rising like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the empire they built on lies. And now, as the dust thickens and the whispers turn into screams, we find ourselves standing at the edge of something far greater than any single scandal. Because what has been exposed is not merely a lie, it is an entire kingdom of deception where every brick is built from silence, every tower is constructed from betrayal, and every gate is guarded by those who profit from pain. And in the center of this kingdom stand the faces we once adored, faces like Blake Lively, presented to us as a beacon of strength. But behind her smile was a prison of control. Behind her glamour was a strategy of manipulation. And Colleen Hoover, the writer who claimed to give voice to the voiceless, was instead selling their silence and turning their wounds into merchandise. And Justin Baldoni, who once believed he could be a bridge between truth and illusion, now finds himself suffocating in the quicksand of Hollywood's ruthless machinery. Because this is how the empire works. It does not simply create movies. It manufactures illusions. It does not simply tell stories, it erases the real ones. It does not simply present art. It buries truth beneath a mountain of glitter and cameras. And when the curtain was pulled back, when the leaks began to spill, when the questions could no longer be ignored, the empire panicked, and in its panic it revealed its true face. The face of desperation, the face of fear, the face of ruthless survival, because an empire built on deception cannot survive exposure. And as the truth spreads, the collapse grows closer. You can see it in the way fans are no longer silent. You can hear it in the way survivors are louder than ever. You can feel it in the way every interview, every press release, every carefully crafted headline feels hollow and forced. Because once the people realize the show is rigged, the illusion shatters, and no actor, no author, no director can glue it back together. And this is why Hollywood is terrified. Because what is happening here is not just a scandal. It is a reckoning. It is a storm that is not only shaking careers, but threatening to wash away the entire system of exploitation that has thrived for decades. And the empire knows that the more they try to silence, the louder the voices will become. The more they try to bury, the deeper the truth will root itself. The more they try to control, the faster they lose control. And so now we see Blake Lively no longer just an actress, but a symbol of complicity. Colleen Hoover, no longer just a writer, but a profiteer of pain. Justin Baldoni, no longer just a director, but a prisoner of silence. And this story becomes more than Hollywood. It becomes a mirror held up to every system that feeds on suffering, every empire that thrives on illusion, every power that silences the truth, because in the end, the truth always wins. It may take time, it may take sacrifice, it may take courage, but it always rises, and when it rises, it does not whisper. It roars like thunder, it shakes the walls, it burns the illusions. It leaves nothing standing except the raw, undeniable reality that can no longer be ignored. And so as the final curtain falls, we are left not with closure, but with a haunting silence that screams louder than any confession. Because what has been revealed is not just a scandal. It is the anatomy of betrayal, the dissection of an empire that thrived on silence and control. And though Hollywood may try to polish its image, though it may try to drown the truth in waves of glitter and staged apologies, the damage is done. The illusion is shattered, and the audience can no longer be fooled because the truth is out there, raw and untamed. And it will keep spreading like fire through dry fields impossible to contain, unstoppable in its reach, and now every smile looks like a mask. Every headline sounds like a script, every promise feels like another trap, and the names Blake Lively, Colleen Hoover, and Justin Baldoni will forever be entangled in this darkness. Reminder of how the machine consumes its own and discards them when convenient. But beyond the names, beyond the film, beyond the scandal lies something even more powerful. A collective awakening, a refusal to be silenced, a hunger for accountability that will not fade with time. And while Hollywood will fight tooth and nail to protect itself, while it will build new illusions and craft new distractions, the truth will continue to stalk it like a shadow that never leaves. And in the end, that is what terrifies the empire the most. Not the exposure, not the scandal, but the knowledge that its mask has slipped forever. And no matter how many lights they shine, no matter how many red carpets they roll out, the darkness underneath can never be hidden again.